Christian education. It's something that not only churches talk about, but it should be something that moms and dads and families talk about. And for this month, here in the month of October, our Lutheran churches traditionally celebrate what we call the Reformation. Over 500 years ago, on October 31st of the year 1517, the Reformation of the Christian Church occurred with Martin Luther, a Catholic priest, posting 95 arguments against the Roman Catholic Church for debate. And it all unraveled from there, where we uncovered a lot of poor church practices and a lot of things that weren't getting done. So today we're going to talk about how valuable our Christian education is and what are ways that we can do something about it. Today in our churches, we celebrate that it is God's Word alone that is our rule and norm. However, there's been some helpful things that help us be reminded of what's actually in the Bible and what the Bible is talking to us about. One of those documents is the 1527 document of Martin Luther's Small Catechism. This is a handbook, not to replace the Bible or to be the Bible itself, but it's a way to help us educate ourselves. And it simply put talks about the 10 Commandments and what does it mean to obey those. Talks about the Apostles' Creed, a basic statement of faith. The Small Catechism helps teach us about the Lord's Prayer. It helps teach us about the sacraments of baptism and Holy Communion, the sacrament of the altar, but also teaches us about confession and absolution, 6 chief parts of the Christian faith are taught still today in our churches. But that's not the original intent. This little handbook was written by Martin Luther to teach his 4-year-old for the sole purpose that the head of the household would teach also their children. The Catechism is a manual, but this is how it came about. In November of the year 1526, Martin Luther, this reformer of the Christian church, proposed a grassroots visitation of all the different churches in Saxony, Germany, to see what the situation was like. This was a day and age where girls were not given education at all. This was in a day and age where most adults were illiterate. And this was a day and age that even the priests didn't even own a Bible. So a team of 4 people, 2 for financial matters, 2 for religious matters, would visit these churches all around Europe. And in February of the year 1527, the visitation began. And of all these different churches, Martin Luther's observations included 2 really big things. That common people, especially those living in rural areas, were largely ignorant of Christian teaching. They didn't even know what it meant to be a Christian. And the second observation was that many pastors, many priests were unfit for teaching. They didn't even know what the Bible said. They didn't even have the Bible. So in the Saxon visitation of 1527, it uncovered really a deplorable condition of the local church. In some places, people had their hearts in the right place, but they lacked any understanding. In other places, people were ignorant, and in some places, people were just simply indifferent. They didn't care. Some in the countryside were closer to really paganism than even Christianity. In some places, there were no church services being held. There were not schools in place. Some pastors couldn't even tell you the 10 Commandments, couldn't tell you what the Apostles' Creed said, and didn't know how to pray the Lord's Prayer. Pastors. They knew nothing of the Bible and instead made their living through brewing beer. Well, at least that got passed down through the ages. And so this former era of the church that forced celibacy, it led to not only wild wedlock, even with priests, it also caused division in God's church. And since there was, in addition, a shortage of pastors to begin with, it was the incompetent ones that were there. And they all couldn't be removed at once. So, Martin Luther began to work on not only a small catechism for moms and dads to teach to their children, but he worked on what we call the large catechism, a big, beefier version of to explain all the things that Christians ought to believe. Luther's large catechism was published in April of 1529, and his small catechism was published in May of 1529. The former is intended to address the lack of education among pastors and teachers. That latter intended for the head of the household to use in the home. The contents of the 6 chief parts are roughly the same, but the level, of course, is different. Luther himself practiced what he preached and used the catechism in his own home with his wife Katie and their 6 children. And today, that is still what beckons us. Whether or not we have a catechism in our home, which we all should, we need moms and dads, we need aunts and uncles, we need grandmas and grandpas to be the teachers of our children. Because if they're not coming to church, where else are they learning the faith? You get to teach them, you get to bring them. And that's what we celebrate with the Lutheran Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. Not only is God's Word back in our hands for us to read and understand it, but because we can read and understand God's Word, we can teach it. Think of yourself today as a teacher of God's Word, and may you practice what you teach as well as what we preach. We'll see you next time for another Fireside Chat.